Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 20th, 2020. There's a number for you. January 2020. I suppose we could go on forever with this one. Okay, so that's our first goofy date of the new year. And it's quite a day. It is Martin Luther King Day. So if you are off from work, congratulations to you. If you are us, you are not. But that's okay. Is it really working to get together with you at 9 o'clock in the morning and talk about the news of the day? I don't think so. Greg doesn't think so either. And he'll be here as well. As for the rest of you, you're all slackers, I guess. We're all here. And if I'm here and you're here, this makes it our time. And it's time to go forward. It's an exciting week. Much happening. The trial of the president is going to take place. We're going to begin this week in the United States Senate. We couldn't really very well take off the Monday of that week. I don't think it really would have worked out all that well, even though the action won't be beginning until Tuesday because federal holiday today. So they'll take the federal holidays seriously, as we all do, and push things back a day or so. That's all right. That's about when they usually begin their work anyhow. Let's see. Where are we today? Daily Co's Radio is live now. It's not really a place, but it's a state of being. We're live now, and it's MLK Day, as Bill reminds us, all the way from Portland, Maine. The impeachment trial starts tomorrow. I've said that much. And all the very fine people, yes, ready for this one, are busy gun nutting in Richmond. Fancy that. They've chosen Martin Luther King Day for their observations, more or less by accident. I think that this is a traditional lobby day, not just for the gun nut lobby, but for pretty much any lobby in the state legislature in Virginia. But it's been quite a problem. Let's say it that way. I think we made mention of it on Friday that the governor of Virginia had, I hope we got to it too. I certainly intended to get to it. In all likelihood, you got to it in taking a look around the news on Friday and heading into the weekend, that the governor of Virginia decided to declare a state of emergency for the Commonwealth. Shouldn't we be declaring a Commonwealth of emergency? We probably ought to take this thing seriously. But a state of emergency in the Commonwealth of Virginia because, of course, there were, as they said, credible threats of serious disturbances / violence being planned at or around this protest. Now, of course, the legislature in Virginia has turned over to Democratic control for the first time in quite some time. And because the people of Virginia voted to try and change some gun laws around here and try and get some common sense restrictions on things that most people around the country have been clamoring for in overwhelming numbers, they decided, of course, this would be a bigger, badder protest than ever. They were about to lose, essentially, so they were going to show up and protest most vigorously. We strenuously object to the democratic process and the outcome that we see as likely in the legislature. And thing is, like I said, it's sort of a traditional thing in the gun groups in Virginia. They got plenty of them. Of course, the NRA is headquartered in Virginia as well. But they have their extremists as well. But I guess the call went out on, I don't know, places we don't look normally. We pay other people to look for us in the white nationalist message boards, etc. So it had, I guess, fittingly for the white nationalists, it became a national cause and an international cause as well, as Canadian Nazis joined with American Nazis in making their way, or planning to make their way to Richmond for this protest. And foolishly enough for them, and I guess we ought to be glad about their openness, I guess they were quite intent on threatening to actually harm people at the rally and possibly even opening fire at the rally, which is an odd thing to do. I assume they meant that they would open fire on counter-protesters who opposed their position, but who knows? They could be opening fire on anybody because they're all gun nuts. They love guns so much that maybe they would enjoy being fired at, or maybe they would enjoy returning fire, or maybe it was a chaos operation. Can't really be entirely sure about this, but I think they're up to 7 people now have been arrested prior to the rally, prior to today, making their way across the border. And some, not all of them, I don't think were bound necessarily for Richmond, but there may have been other activities that occupied their gaze at the time. But, I mean, we're basically now going to see how this unfolds. The governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, I remember when he was supposed to resign immediately because blackface, that didn't happen. And here we are with him in charge instead, and I think doing pretty much the right thing. It's about, maintaining order there, and usually that's a pretty good excuse when there are leftist protests going on. They seem to love the idea of maintaining order, and either, they usually don't forbid the protest outright, but they come out with some strict rules for, as they say, keeping order. But of course, I'll be very interested to see what enforcement looks like today. They've banned weapons of all sorts on the Capitol grounds today, but video already emerging of people walking across town, not yet on I don't know if it's on a hill or not, the Capitol in Richmond, but the Capitol complex, making their way there and parading around with the usual body armor and AR-15s and other cosplay materials. I did, in fact, see somebody today make a good joke about noting for the record that the people who came in tactical gear, wearing knee pads to own the libs, as they say. Okay, well, I guess that's fun for you, but not sure what's going to come of it if they decide to try to defy the ban on weapons in the Capitol area. Keep an eye out for kettling and tear gassing, which is what they usually do when unarmed left-leaning protesters do something that make the authorities unhappy. But I don't think we'll be seeing that today. It could mean it's because the gun nuts are right and that being heavily armed actually protects you from police abuse. It could be that the police themselves lean that direction as well and consider the gun protesters friends. It could be a practical consideration. We can't really have a running automatic weapons gun battle going on in the middle of Richmond. It could be a little bit of all three. Well, let's talk about it a little bit later and turn the things over to Greg, waiting patiently in the ferocious snowstorm. I don't know. What's the weather like there today, Greg?
I don't know, but I'm unarmed. Okay. So if it comes in ferociously, not much I can do about it. It's cold. It's like 15 degrees here.
Yeah. All right. It's a cold day. It has turned bitter here. And it's hailing in Australia, where it was raining fire before.
Hail, Australia?
Yeah.
How are you?
Hello. Maybe,
so,
I don't know. Almost
it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's a quiet holiday weekend still.
Yes.
Today's Martin Luther King Day, which we should acknowledge. And Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed for trying to disrupt the system.
Yes.
And so the fact that there's a gun protest on Martin Luther King Day in Virginia, I think, is notable. And
yes.
Hope it all goes well. But, when the Proud Boys are there, you never know.
Right. They love, ruining peace.
Well, things have happened. So one has to be relatively careful. And, if you want to maintain order, I'm always interested in exactly which order you'd like to maintain it in.
Yes.
Who goes first?
I will.
So, the political world basically is concentrating on a couple of things, and there are some big stories that really don't get enough attention. The issues with aid to Puerto Rico and the earthquakes there are something that's terribly undercovered, for example. But the political world is focused on the one hand on impeachment, with the trial starting tomorrow, and on the other hand, the Iowa caucuses, which start in 2 weeks. So which do you want to do first?
Very soon, 2 weeks. Well, I guess we'll go chronologically. How about that?
So let's do impeachment because that comes up soon. And in the latest MSN tracking poll, do you support or oppose the Senate voting to remove President Trump from office? We now have supported 57. It's ticked up the last day. And oppose is at 37, so that's a 20-point gap there. And there's no evidence on that or on the very interesting civics poll that Daily Kos follows, where impeachment is 8% do it, 52 to 45 these days.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yep. Right.
I'm looking at the latest poll here. And among independents on the civics poll, because they let you do all of that, it's gone from even to 50 support, 46 opposed. So basically what I'm saying is there's no evidence whatsoever that there's some kind of backlash that's helping Trump. It doesn't exist. If anything, it's slightly trending in the direction of impeachment. And, of course, we now have the trials. What we don't know, there's a lot we don't know about the trial. We don't know how much of it is going to be televised. We don't know if there are going to be witnesses. We don't know if the witnesses will be televised. So that's all to be determined at this point. The New York Times tries to delve into all the questions that we don't know about impeachment, and they get a lot of them wrong.
Oh, rats.
Democrats seek more testimony and evidence for impeachment trial, even as the Senate prepares for the substantive start of the proceedings against President Trump. There are big unanswered questions, which is basically what did Trump know and when did he know it? The record of actions by Mr. Trump and his underlings is riddled with gaps, and new evidence has been surfacing at the 11th hour. In other words, all of the evidence that's surfacing is confirmatory for everything that we thought we knew.
Yes.
And there's very little there that we didn't know. And what surfaces is somebody saying, well, I heard and I was there and I saw Trump talk about X, so that means I was in the room and it's firsthand knowledge. Mm-hmm. But it's the same information that we already have. Oh, well, then there's nothing new there. Well, on the one hand, it's firsthand knowledge so that your defense sort of goes out the window. And on the other hand, it isn't new because we know this. We know from the Mueller report and before, Trump was trying to influence the 2016 election from foreign sources, and he's trying to do the same thing in 2020. And you really have to be some sort of blindered idiot to think that, these big gaps that we don't know. What you really mean is we don't have conclusive video of Trump saying X. But you don't need that to know that Trump said X if everybody's telling you that that's what he said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it confirms what we learned earlier. It's nice to see corroborative evidence.
It is. Emerging, but, again, the thing that you have to emphasize, which isn't emphasized enough, is none of it is exculpatory. There's not one shred of evidence over the last 2 months that's come out that makes Trump look better. The only thing that happens is new evidence comes out that makes Trump look worse. So when you say there's unanswered questions, only if you refuse to see what's in front of you.
Yes. And many people do refuse.
Yeah, they do.
A lot of them are senators.
When it's the New York Times doing it, it's like, come on, what kind of stupid are you?
I don't know. I mean, the New York Times is not having a great day, honestly.
It isn't. They also have their endorsements, but that goes into the Iowa caucus thing, so we'll do that a little bit later. So Jennifer Rubin writes, the three types of bad faith arguments, accusations of falsity, effectively dropped when evidence is irrefutable. And the New York Times is not saying, well, we don't know whether these accusations are true or false. We just think that we don't have definitive evidence that even somebody who needs to be led by a list of things can accept. Insistence on suppressing evidence. And again, one of the big uncovered, unrecognized, undercovered, I should say, not uncovered, but undercovered story is how much Bill Barr is running a cover-up by sitting on all this stuff and not allowing it to happen, by coordinating with the SDNY and Rudy Giuliani's indictment that hasn't come yet, and we don't know why not. So insistence on suppressing evidence, and then denial that abuse of power is impeachable. That's the new one that Alan Dershowitz unveiled over the weekend, which is all kinds of stupid. Even if he did everything you still can't remove him because it just doesn't rise to the level of impeachment. Well, what does that mean? It means that I'm going to vote no, regardless of what the evidence shows, is what it means.
He's not even going to vote, but he would if he were there.
So Jen Rubin's column is titled, "The Media Must Expose Bad Faith's Arguments on Impeachment. This is False Equivalence on Steroids." And it's exactly what it is. And when the New York Times says, well, we don't have enough evidence to really say one way or the other, but our emails, that was fine because we took Clinton Cash, we published that and said that's more than enough for people to know.
Okay. Yes, true. Right. They did make that decision. That was awesome.
So you're looking at this and
We can
saying,
talk
what
about that.
in the world is going on? Now, it's going to be interesting. We don't know exactly how this is going to be presented to the public. We do know that the brief, the written report of how the House managers are going to go ahead with this trial have been published. And the response from the White House has been published, which, is basically, I got pencils in my ears. How dare you do this? And not much else. So I think in the end, they're going to take the tack of saying, well, of course he did everything, but it doesn't matter.
I think there's not much that's available to them other than that.
Well, that's my prediction, so we'll see what happens.
I will take it. I'll tell a note to self to write that down as your position.
Yeah. It's on record here, so
yes,
we know what's going on.
Always roll back the tape.
So there's that.
Okay.
So in the meantime, the Iowa caucus are coming, and the New York Times decided to roll out in reality TV style with a 1-hour interview tape of various and sundry candidates thrown together. This is the questions that we asked the candidates, and I don't know, and then they had their debate, which was good because they usually do this behind closed doors, but at least you had a chance to see what the thinking was. And some of the debate questions that we saw in the Democratic primaries were not nearly as good as some of the questions that they put directly to the candidates. Why should we trust you? They said to Joe Biden about the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. And he basically made the same kind of argument that Hubert Humphrey made back in the day, which is that when you're vice president, you're a member of the team, and when you're president, you're captain of the team. That didn't go well for Humphrey. It's an interesting debate, but in the end, they decided they couldn't decide. They wouldn't do Biden, but they acknowledged that there's two courses of thinking that run through the Democratic electorate. You need radical change because the way things are just so screwed up. And you really need to restore things the way they were, and that's the best way to get everybody to vote for us. And so they couldn't decide, and so they duly endorsed Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar. And you scratch your head and say, that was didn't make any sense.
No.
And I wasted an hour listening and watching to this. So, everybody's making fun of them. And the Des Moines Register is going to probably endorse somebody themselves in a week, because they usually do it the week before the caucuses, which are in 2 weeks. But the thing about the Des Moines Register is that they're usually wrong about who wins.
Oh.
I mean, they have a pretty bad track record.
I really knew that.
So we'll see. But do these endorsements really matter anymore? I really don't think they do. I think they're kind of a distraction, but it was kind of interesting. It was a slow weekend, and if you're watching football, great, and if you don't watch football, you had to have something to watch. So this was just good.
Well, all right. It's among the many shows that were available for you for your entertainment during the weekend.
Right, and the stuff that's going on in Virginia today obviously is going to need a very, very close eye. We like Virginia. We love people in Virginia, and we hope everybody stays safe there.
Yeah, hope so. We'll see whether anybody decides that they think they can get away with a little something extra. I think we'll have just the big, military cosplay parade and not much else. It's very cold.
That'd be fine. If that's all that happens, that'd be great.
That would be preferable to A, anyone getting hurt, or B, having to find out who wins in a just straight up fight between, if there even would be one, the police, or trying to find out what side of the police on, if people are just a little too
we don't want to know.
Yeah, I almost don't want to know the answer to that one. It's unfortunate.
Right.
Okay.
So that's basically, pretty much what's going on.
Okay.
Washington Post over the weekend had this really interesting piece. Once this is over, we'll be kings. How Lev Parnas worked his way into Trump's world and now is rattling it. When Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway told CNN, I don't know Lev Parnas, his lawyer, attorney Bondi, Bondy, who also tweeted, no relation to Pam Bondi,
right,
Bondi, tweeted a close-up of Parnas and Conway, their heads leaning toward one another, both smiling widely. Lev remembers, said the hashtag. When Trump announced that former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi was joining his legal team, his lawyer tweeted a photo of Parnas and Bondi seated at a table together, their arms around each other's shoulders.
Nice.
When Trump himself told reporters on Thursday he didn't know who this man is, an assertion he's also made shortly after Parnas was arrested, his lawyer posted a video of Parnas chatting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago in December 2016. The video shows Parnas at the front of a crowd introducing the president-elect to a broad-shouldered man who, according to Bondi, the lawyer, is for Lev Parnas with a Y, not Bondi, the cheater from Florida, was then serving at the top's tax official of Ukraine. In interviews, Parnas has said he's convinced prosecutors working for Barr, that's Attorney General Bill Barr, have pursued the criminal case against him to keep him quiet about Trump's work in Ukraine. He said he believes transparency is now his best protection against further criminal action.
Yeah.
This past week, he told CNN's Anderson Cooper his goal is to make Trump understand he's not a king. And I think it's important for the country to find out the truth, he said, exactly what happened. So the speculation there, of course, is that Lev Parnas is not a good person. But, when you're prosecuting Trump, you have to have shady people as witnesses because the only people Trump hires and who will work for him are shady people.
Yes.
And it's quite interesting that this speculation, it would be irresponsible not to speculate, that the whole reason Parnas went public with this isn't to help himself with SDNY and the legal folks. It's to protect himself from the bosses of SDNY because he thinks Barr is so corrupt that if he doesn't go public with this, Barr will simply make him disappear because that's what Barr does. He covers things up and then buries stuff. And they would throw Parnas in jail. He wouldn't be able to talk. Nobody could reach him. End of story. And he's saying, I'm not having any of that. It's not that I fear for my physical safety that somebody's going to throw me out of a 14th-story window in Moscow, which does happen. It's more that Barr is going to cover all this stuff up. So he mentions Barr several times. And, of course, the news people say, oh, well, you can't say William Barr is because you don't have evidence. Well, that's because you refuse to cover Barr as if he's John Mitchell, which he is. And if you did, you'd have a lot of stuff like, well, it throws a cloud on Bill Barr, and, we don't really know if he's honest. Butter emails Clinton Cash. So don't tell me it can't be done. You do it all the time. But why you're deciding not to do it about Barr is a real head-scratcher because this guy is as crooked as they come.
Yeah, and I have tucked away elsewhere some interesting speculation about what Parnas had to say and what Parnas might be thinking Barr is up to. We'll talk about that a little bit later as we continue with our
Good, because that's a fascinating topic that people ought to be talking about.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Tom Nichols tweets, of the first two members of Congress to endorse Trump, one is going to jail and the other will be sentenced in March. So we know that shady characters are the ones that wind up on the Trump train.
Right.
This is not a surprise. We know this. It's a fact.
Yes.
We're talking about Chris Collins, who was sentenced to 2 years in prison for insider trading.
Yes. Right. So that was kind of an exciting development as well. It's a good try for the first one to endorse the president. He could get 2 years in prison out of it is pretty good. Like I said, for going first, I think a good effort. Pretty soon the sentences will start to get longer, but first one out of the box, there's not much you can expect.
Right.
Good job.
So meanwhile, other things have happened. For example. Under the radar here, Rod Rosenstein admits he authorized the public release of text messages between FBI agent Peter Strzok and FBI attorney Lisa Page.
This is weird.
But he claims he only did it to help them avoid the additional harm of prolonged selective disclosures.
He did a good job, didn't he?
And Lisa Page said, well, all I can say is I very much look forward to Rod's deposition.
Yeah. That may be in the offing. I think both of them are suing Rosenstein personally, as well as the DOJ.
So here is a reminder about how these things go online. Lisa Page tweets this and gets all sorts of nasty responses. Ben Wittes from Lawfare says, and as an experiment in disinformation, I just ran all of the hostile responses to this tweet from Lisa through Bot Sentinel. All were reported to have high probability of being troll bots. That should tell you something. Jack, worth a look at automated activity sliming Lisa. Now, I have to say that I want to put this in the context of a Virginia Heffernan tweet. If you criticize Bernie Sanders, you get reported to your boss, sent rape imagery, savaged as brain damaged, a snake, a Nazi for days. The Sanders campaign smears, bullies, defames, and threatens critics. Happened in 2016. It's happening again. This is bolstered by a Kurt Bardella piece on NBC. Trump's MAGA supporters and Twitter Bernie bros have this ugly tactic in common. But what I'm trying to say is it doesn't represent Bernie supporters. You have to appreciate the fact that a lot of these are trolls as well.
It would be, do well to keep in mind that, the person who you think is harassing you because of their true, steadfast support for Bernie Sanders, it might not even be an American citizen at all.
Yeah, exactly right. So, don't take it to heart.
Yes.
Don't say, well, I like Bernie, but I can't stand his support. Well, actually, what you can't stand is his trolls.
Yes.
Who are out there trying to, and Trump is doing it himself. Here's another example of how Bernie's getting, screwed because the whole Democratic primary is rigged. He comes out with that all the time.
Yes.
So, just keep in mind, let it go in one ear and out the other, and don't take it personally when you see this stuff.
Yeah, it's not easy.
And it should not reflect on Bernie. He's not doing it.
All right. It's a good thing to keep in mind, and it's a good exercise to work on. It's not easy to just let it roll off your back, and of course, sometimes there could be a real live idiot behind it.
At least on Twitter, mute
know.
and block are your friends.
All right. Well,
you can always try Bot Sentinel and see if you're talking to a real person.
Oh, true. Right. Try that. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The conversation continues. Greg Dworkin's still with us, and let's see, any more major? I think we've hit all the major topics.
We do. So since we've done that,
again,
it's going to be something of an abbreviated stretch for me, but I'm going to finish up with this really interesting tweet storm, which I'm giving you in thread reader, so it looks more like a story.
I love stories.
From Rachel Bidikofer.
Oh, okay.
She says, it's a good time to do another 30,000-foot view post again.
I'm afraid of heights. All right, let's go.
Ready?
Oh, my God. I'll close my eyes. Go.
Altitude? Oh, you don't like altitude?
I get altitude sickness.
Yeah, well, you're hanging from a wire here, looking down 30,000 feet. Or maybe it's one of those glass elevators where the floor is glass and you can just look down, so you get that oozy feeling in your stomach that everybody just loves, except for the ones who hate it. The entire administration ran an illegal scheme to withhold military aid from Ukraine.
It's true.
Literally all of them were involved.
Yes.
That includes Bill Barr.
Right. He's the
and thus,
law
when
guy.
the scandal broke, they all lied at multiple points except Mulvaney. Thus obstructed justice. The funny thing is, everybody was yelling at Mulvaney. He's the one that told the truth.
Well,
he said, we're doing this and get over it.
True. That doesn't mean you're not going to get yelled at.
All right, but that's different than getting indicted. In a practical sense, this means the country's Secretary of State oversaw the investigation into a scandal he was personally involved in. That's Mike Pompeo. The Republican Party's minority party chair, Devin Nunes, oversaw the House impeachment hearing into a scandal he was personally involved in. The Attorney General, Bill Barr, used his position as Attorney General in the United States to try to squash the whistleblower complaint because it brought to light a scandal he was personally involved in. Once that failed, he used his position as Attorney General to hamper the investigation. A reminder, on that phone call to Ukraine, Trump, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, said, talk to Bill Barr.
Yes, at some point. He said, talk to everybody.
Or at some point, but talk to Bill Barr. Oh, I didn't have
Yes.
anything. Talk to Bill Barr. What does that mean? It means he was involved. Once that failed, he
Trump
used his
wanted him
position as
involved.
Attorney General to hamper the investigation. Through it all, they told the American public that the event never happened, not only knowing that it did, but after having been personally involved in it. They all still sit in positions in which they can and are using the powers of their offices to thwart investigations into their own activities. Again, a reminder, Devin Nunes was at one point chair of the Intel Committee, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And at
before
the
the
same
election.
time, during the impeachment hearings in the House this year, tried to obstruct something that he was involved in.
Yes, people do that.
This is also the case with the
Guilty
Vice President,
criminals.
Mike Pence, says Rachel Bitterkofer. Via control by their party of the Senate, these individuals are planning on using the rules of the Senate's impeachment power to avoid having to answer questions under oath about their involvement in what has now been declared a crime by the GAO. I'm old. I still call that the General Accounting Office. It's
Yes.
now the Government Accountability Office.
Right.
But the Bronx Zoo is the Bronx Zoo, no matter how you rename it, and the Triborough Bridge and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel will always be what they are. The GOP is
National
using
Airport.
the powers of majority status of the Senate and control of what is supposed to be an impartial Justice Department to obstruct justice by refusing to have evidence or call the administration officials as witnesses, at least thus far. I remind you of all of that because although the level of malfeasance in the administration may be similar to Watergate and that the scandal involved multiple players, we're in totally new territory in that these revelations about Barr and Nunes have not forced these men out of their positions. Most especially Barr, who as Attorney General has massive influence over the federal law enforcement apparatus. The fact that our system, in addition to all the other issues, a likely acquittal despite inarguable violations of the office, perhaps the most serious is that our system is functioning completely unprecedented place where there appears to be no accountability in the cabinet. Keep in mind, at the beginning of this administration, we saw cabinet members forced out due to excessive travel expenses, outlandish furniture purchase, because that's how the old system was. It had tightly constrained rules of acceptable conduct and norms, and now look where we are in terms of Pompeo and Barr and utter lack of even a conversation about the fact that they should still be in their jobs. It's very telling as to how much destruction has already been wrought on our political culture, our norms, and this democracy, and I would add, and this is where the media and the newspapers particularly fail us.
Yes.
They ought to be all over Pompeo and Barr to resign. I don't understand why they're not. Back to Bitterkofer. We've lost a great deal of our 240-year institutional integrity. It seems to be that few are really focusing on this big picture problem. End of tweet rant. I think it's absolutely right on the money.
Yeah.
And it's
I would say
infuriating.
so. Yes, that too. Yeah, I do not know why it isn't a bigger issue, except that.
But our emails in Clinton Cash, because,
Yeah, well, there was just no
not that
gigantic
we'll apologize
issue
for
to
that, but
Right.
why are you worried about whether or not you're going to satisfy the Klobuchar versus the Warren readers? Why aren't you concentrating on Barr and Pompeo and demanding that they
don't know.
resign?
That would have been an interesting endorsement. We endorse arresting
We
Pompeo
endorse
and
the
Barr.
arrest and the conviction of Mike Pompeo and Bill Barr for conspiracy.
That would be
That would be fine.
Yeah,
that
I
would be
endorse
okay.
that.
That would have been a good endorsement.
Yeah, a lot of agreement around the country on that one. I don't know. I mean, I guess the only thing I can come up with explanations. They're just not good reasons. It doesn't excuse any of it. But
Well, access, they won't
yeah,
talk to us
well,
if we do that.
That's true. There's access. There's the fact that an even more enormous aspect of the scandal demands a lot of attention. The president himself being involved and driving all of it, or if you prefer, the vice president also being involved. That came up over the weekend as who I don't even remember who it was who was out. I got shut down almost immediately. The suggestion, well, Pence is implicated in all of this too, and probably ought to be removed. And maybe if Democrats offer a deal where Nancy Pelosi disclaims her ascension to the presidency upon the removal of both the president and vice president, then Republicans will agree in the Senate to do the right thing and remove both Trump and Pence, and instead put Grassley as president pro tem in office as acting president. Which, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, for one thing.
Yeah.
But, that didn't go over all that well either, and not with me, not with anybody. But I wouldn't spend a great deal of time on that, but I understand the sentiment. You want to do whatever you can to get the right result on the impeachment. But, as long as we're talking theories, we have some problems with that deal-making as well.
Absolutely. Anyway, that's my summary for this holiday morning.
Yes.
And
good.
we'll be back on Wednesday. By the time we come back on Wednesday, we'll have more substantive bombshells that have probably come out between now and then. I will give you a semi-amusing one, except it's
all right.
It's not really all that amusing.
Oh.
Let's see if I can just put my fingers
part.
on it. It's about one of Trump's security people.
Oh, is this the
rumor inside
one that got booted?
Is a fellow
today?
named Peek, P-E-E-K, and a White House advisor on Europe and Russia issues that's been placed on administrative leave pending a security evaluation. Rumor inside NSC, National Security Council, is that Peek had relations with Russian hookers and could not locate his government cell phone. An insider source tells AP.
I have one guess where it is, and I bet the president's the man to recover this cell phone. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's an actual, real, true AP story.
Put him on the case. He knows how to grab that back.
With AP sources, so we're not just scurrilously putting out rumors there.
That was pretty scurrilous, I thought. So, yeah. But AP is reporting that. I did see other people saying it.
Yeah,
but,
no, it's the Associated Press, so we're going with that. Here's another one. Newly released, Attorney General Barr dropped in on the Giuliani meeting with Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division.
Right.
So what's the analysis here? What the heck was he doing there? This Barr explanation that he happened to drop by doesn't add up. The Attorney General doesn't just drop in. It's like down the hall. The Attorney General works on a different floor. For the Attorney General to get all the way down there to the conference room would have involved the security detail. Plus, on form, the Attorney General doesn't go to others. It's true. It's like in academia. If you have a full professor and an assistant professor, you meet in the full professor's office. It's not the other way around. It just isn't.
That's likely
not how it's
true.
Done.
Where did you have that somewhere in your?
I didn't, but I just I saw that.
Jeff Stein one.
Here it is. This is where I'm getting it from.
Okay.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. It made me think of how outraged Republicans were about Bill Clinton and a certain former Attorney General being on the airport tarmac at the same time as one another, and people thought that was awfully incriminating. And it's a little weird that the Attorney General would drop by. I just decided to come into your office because Rudy Giuliani is the topic of discussion and is here.
Right.
No
so this morning news, two Republican sources tell L.A. Caldwell, D.C., Senate rules will allow each side 24 hours for presentations crammed into 2 Senate days. Dems are already calling it a dead-of-the-night presentation and a complete sham.
Yes, I did see some
This would not
about
follow the Clinton model that McConnell has repeatedly cited as a guide, says Heidi Press below. That said, the official resolution is still not out. Arguments for both sides took 3 days in 1999. They didn't even use the full 24 hours. So Senator Graham had said he wants the Senate trial done by the time Trump has his State of the Union. So that's the calendar that they're working on, and we'll see how that goes. So that ties everything up for me. Don't have anything else. Sorry. You're on your own. Take care.
All right. Well, I think we can handle it from here on.
Good. You'll have to.
Yeah, right. I have no choice. Okay. Well, thanks very much. We'll take these as starting positions and see what else. I forget what happened over the weekend. I tried to blot it all out.
Well, there was
mind-altering substances.
Screen Actor Guild Award.
Oh yes, right. That's
talk
true.
About that. Or football games. You can always talk about that. All this stuff I'm not interested in.
Right. Well, both caused traumatic injury for me.
Well, there you go.
Watching either one of them.
Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Very good. Thanks, Greg. And we'll catch up on Wednesday. I guess we've got some. I should have talked about it right at the end there. We have some maybe some odd feedback issue working on your end. Although I was thinking, well, I wanted to thank you, Greg, for calling in from either the set of the Terminator, possibly, or it sounded a little bit like those scenes from inside the time/space travel machine in the movie Contact with the big rings swinging there. But I'm not certain what that is, and seeing as how I couldn't even begin to make a guess at how to get rid of it, or whether anybody even heard it but me. Could be on my end, for all I know. But it appears to be gone now. But, things happen. Maybe, I'm going to guess, maybe there was vacuuming happening somewhere in the house. That's my guess. And it sort of vibrates through the house. And because he has such a high-quality microphone, maybe that's what it was picking it up. Well, that's not really an important consideration for the rest of the day, is it? Instead, we can follow up on some of these other items. And I have a feeling, though, that between Pocket, where the long reads are, and the tweet stream from the weekend, we might do better for the next couple of minutes to sort of look back at what happened in my weekend, because sometimes the thoughts are more connected, believe it or not, over the tweet stream than this disjointed collection of articles I've put together. But then I tried to weave something together, though, on the Lisa Page, Peter Strzok story, because that's a really weird one. But I don't see it having as much impact on the events of this week going forward with the impeachment trial. So I think we have a little bit more time on that one. The impeachment trial thing, very strange. True. Not sure yet, as they said, how procedure is really going to work for this thing, even though they keep trying to pretend that they are relying on the Clinton impeachment procedure. There are clear departures from it being made, and it's unclear exactly what we're going to get to see, which is disturbing for a presidential impeachment, not just because we like to see the brass tacks of procedure played out on this show, but because you would think that something as historical, I guess, if you really want to think of it in those terms, it's not uncommon to think of it that way, is something you want the American people to have ready access to seeing and for it to be transparent. I saw some complaints in the last day or two about this idea of 24 hours of presentation divided among 2 Senate days, but again, I'm not sure entirely what they're talking about. No one knows what a Senate day really is. You have to talk about the difference between legislative days and calendar days, and the weird temporal displacements that the Senate, among other things, I mean, it can declare anything to be, fair game or not, and break the rules and rewrite the rules with a bare majority and make true false and false true if they want to. And one of the more common manipulations is to finagle the calendars and decide that today will also be yesterday, and the days will continue for legislative days will continue for calendar days at a time. So there's always that wrench in the works. But the idea that they might force the Senate to stay in session almost around the clock, such that large parts of the arguments, the opening arguments being presented in the impeachment trial, take place in the wee hours of the morning when no one will be around to watch them. And then, as well, Greg also mentioned some question about how much and from what, how much would be televised, how much of the proceedings would be televised. And we're not used to asking that question, because the usual procedure is whenever the Senate is in session, C-SPAN 2, at least, would be covering it. C-SPAN 1 reserves itself for coverage of the House. Though they'll deviate from their norm from time to time when their primary coverage, whatever it is, whichever House they cover primarily, is out of session and nothing's going on. But C-SPAN 2 would ordinarily cover the whole thing, and here we are reminded of what's usually a good thing, and works out for the advantage of transparency or for reporting, allowing the public to view what's going on, is that the bodies themselves control the cameras. It usually works out as a good thing because the House of Representatives and the Senate each own and control they're operated by House and Senate employees. C-SPAN, they're viewed as the C-SPAN cameras because that's where the feed comes from. And whenever you turn on your cable TV or satellite provider, whatever, and switch it over to C-SPAN, it says right down in the corner, C-SPAN, C-SPAN 2. If you're lucky or have been punished by the gods, depending on your view of things, C-SPAN 3 might be available to you. Who knows? Maybe they have a C-SPAN streaming service now these days to expand their capacity. I have no idea. But we get used to the idea that those are C-SPAN cameras, and they're not. They are owned by the government, operated by employees of the House of Representatives and or the Senate. The feed from the cameras goes to the control board in the radio and TV gallery. It's the Senate controls the radio and TV gallery for some reason. They had to split up the two different galleries, and the House got the daily and periodical press, print gallery, and the Senate got the TV and radio gallery, I believe. Anyway, that goes up to the board there, and C-SPAN's business model is they just pipe that stuff out and send it to their satellites, along with the little C-SPAN bug that goes in the corner. And they do some added value content. I mean, that's the term for it, added value content. You tell me whether it adds any value or not. Where they take callers, or they conduct interviews, or whatever. They take you to other political type events around the country and run tape on it. But when they're covering the House and Senate, it's just them taking the government feed, for which the government doesn't charge anybody any money, and slapping their logo on it and and piping it out. I think we discussed this when I was once describing the idea I had in mind of if we were able to get press credentials for Daily Kos, we could pipe the same video feed out and tap into it, put our own logo on it, and I guess we could do commentary over it as well, and I could be explaining the procedure as it goes on. For the most part, though, 99% of that feed would be absolutely deadly boring, but every once in a while you'd be able to make a good insight for people. Anyway, because those cameras are owned and operated by employees, in the case of the Senate side of the Senate, they would presumably have to answer to the Senate leadership, which could mean that there might be ways for the Senate leadership, which unfortunately at this point is topped by Moscow Mitch McConnell, to influence whether or not you get to see entire portions of the proceedings. There are rules about it, and the rules are that ordinarily the cameras are on and rolling whenever the Senate is in session, even if they're waiting on a quorum call or something. You've seen the familiar routine there. They play the classical music, and sometimes they'll put that video up in a box on the side and play some other content to keep you from growing too bored. Although, I don't know, have you seen this other content? Anyway, that's the rules. And they also have rules about, for the most part, those cameras are in fixed positions, that they want that to be predictable and knowable to the members of the Senate as a matter of respect to them. They're supposed to be dignified people. They want to know that there's going to be places where they can go to nod off, pick their nose, blow their nose, otherwise maintain nasal hygiene, however they choose to do it. I don't know if they find themselves neti potting on the Senate floor, but really that should probably be prohibited. Anyway, it's supposed to be a calm, staid, relatively dignified thing to televise it, and so they don't like cameras being moved around, and they don't like weird angles that they're not used to knowing about. And a Senate trial, because of the way it sets up logistically on the Senate floor, might best be covered by relocating some of the cameras. And both C-SPAN and the rest of the wider television reporting community has to depend on the goodwill and judgment of the Senate leadership for making decisions about whether or not it should be permissible to, say, position another camera or add another camera that would be capable of taking usable television shots of witnesses. Where do we expect, if there are witnesses, where do we expect that they will be positioned during the questioning? And ought we not to have cameras available to get a frontal shot of the people questioning those witnesses? And again, that too it's not entirely clear where they would stand and what direction they would be facing. Are the witnesses going to sit where the clerks usually do, facing outwards? So that would be no problem for the usual cameras to capture them. Will the questioners be speaking facing them? Will they be asking questions from also from the rostrum? It's hard to know. I mean, I'm sure they have some ideas about where they will be, and the TV people are trying hard to make sure that they have the cameras to cover it. But it's up to McConnell to allow that to happen, and it's not clear that he's inclined to do it. In addition, there are rules under which some or perhaps even all of the impeachment could take place in a closed session, particularly if there are issues of national security being discussed, and this is an impeachment about issues of national security. It's possible then that if they move into closed session, the normal rules there would operate in aid of the Senate leadership's desire to shut off the cameras. That's part of the standing rules of the way the cameras are used now. And then, of course, those rules could be changed or reinterpreted at the drop of a hat. So it's difficult to know for sure what will be allowed to see, and that's troubling all by itself. In addition, of course, even outside the chamber, the Senate is imposing new rules about access for members of the press to senators sitting as jurors, which I suppose you could make an analogy to sequestration of a jury during a regular Article III court proceeding, or a state court proceeding for that matter. Though this would be the first time that senators seemed to be particularly interested in enforcing the rules in that weird parallel sense. In every other sense, for instance, taking an oath to do impartial justice when you've promised to do otherwise would create a serious problem for you in an Article III court, but not here. And who knows, maybe you'd get away with it in an Article III court too. This is one of the big holes in the system, not so far, I think, discussed very widely. Even in Rachel Bidikofer's 30,000-foot view, which was otherwise an excellent recap of where we are, you all saw that people who swore they weren't going to be impartial nonetheless took the oath promising that they would be and signed the oath book, and no one was struck by lightning. Nothing happened. None of this stuff is self-executing. You can absolutely say one thing and then promise another, and half the country will say, "Oh my God, outrageous," and the other half of the country will say, "Not outrageous at all, and why are you so worried about it?" And then we look around at each other and say, "Well, what are we going to do? I don't know." And then we have a gun rally where guns on one side are threatened by guns on the other side, and we don't know who wins or whether there's two sides or not. There's many situations. Today's a lot about going to be in a lot of situations that are going to be about not having any clear-cut understanding of what's likely to happen next. And it's awfully difficult to predict when you have to stop every 5 minutes to say, by the way, yeah, there are normal rules, but one, these aren't normal times, and two, those rules can, if they want to, they can change them. They can be changed with 51 votes, and they may just decide to do that because to hell with it. Speaking of other people not struck by lightning, for their lies. I'll scroll a little bit back. We'll revisit some of the things from the weekend via the Twitter feed. Ken Vogel of the New York Times reporting late last evening that last month, as he says, that would be the New York Times, reported that Pete Sessions, former Congressman Pete Sessions, gave Parnas, remember him, an anti-Yovanovitch letter to give to Trump in an envelope that Sessions signed on the back and addressed to Mr. President in front. And remember, for a while, they were looking for, I think the Times also isolated a number of photos of what looked like the president accepting, and I don't remember was from Parnas himself. I don't think so. No, it must have been someone else passing it to him. But the president accepting an envelope from somebody and stuffing it into his jacket pocket, which, could have just been a cash bribe. I don't really know what it is. But it was alleged to be this letter from Sessions. So they asked Sessions about it, and Sessions told people, no, I don't know about that. I have no memory of doing that. However, Vogel shared pictures last night, which I think came to him as part of the document dump from Parnas, photos of that envelope. And I guess what we're looking at here is, I'm guessing, is photos that Parnas had on his phone of this envelope, both front and back. And it's accompanied by a link to a New York Times piece, but I don't think that the piece actually explains the new news about the envelope. It may be that it outlines the story of the claim, Parnas's claim of the existence of the envelope. Anyway, Sessions denied the whole thing, and yet there are photos. Of course, it's a photo of what is a envelope, and I don't know, I guess you could say we don't really know what's inside it, and could it all have been forged? I don't really know, but I will say this, Parnas seems to have taken pictures of everything. It's almost as if he knew that he was dealing with a bunch of backstabbing liars and doing work that they would disclaim any knowledge of and try to disavow, like he was some sort of professional spy or operator or something. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what other tidbits are worthy of some mention. And we'll just continue with the roundup work here, just to be up to speed on everything. There's a million moving parts from the weekend. We can skip over this part probably. Although everybody had a good joke, a good laugh at the expense of Space Force over the weekend, as well as apparently the only news they could come up with about Space Force. I'm not even sure why they bothered doing this. They tried to portray it as the new Space Force utility uniforms being issued. Utilities being generally speaking, when you're talking about utilities, you're talking about the fatigues that you very frequently would see members of the other branches in. And those are very often the camouflage pattern fatigue, as opposed to the dress uniforms, for instance. And, the whole rap on Space Force is that, all it really is kind of a reorganization of what was already in place for space. The U.S. Air Force's Space Command is what chiefly makes up Space Force, but it'll be, I guess so. They're reorganizing it as its own branch, supposedly. And I don't think that means very much functionally to anybody, even inside the operation. But I guess the only issue of importance with respect to Space Force is that, again, it is a stupid, maybe even off-the-cuff thing that the dummy president blurted out. And to him, it was a big idea to make it a new branch. But I think it was largely because he didn't have any idea that there was an Air Force Space Command, that he thought. And I guess if you were a person who didn't know that, and then you also thought you were commander-in-chief, you might think it was a good idea to say, space is like really super important. And it is. And we ought to have, as we're thinking of weaponizing space, which is not a good idea. And usually when people think about weaponizing space, it's in the context of we need to have an international convention prohibiting the weaponization of space. But of course, Donald Trump's view of everything is we ought to weaponize whatever it is. I want to weaponize hamburgers. So, you weaponize it. And I guess he thought that weaponizing something meant you had to have a special dedicated branch of weaponized service that would oversee it. And he didn't know about Space Command. So he put out this was like on his wish list. And I guess the most amazing thing about Space Force is that the whole military apparatus, instead of saying, no, that's dumb, we already have Space Command. Don't worry about it, Mr. President. We got you covered. You're going to have everything you want, and it's already there. Why don't you commission a new medal or something like that, and we can make that your thing. But instead, they all fell all over themselves. Like, I think we can make this happen. Because it wasn't crazy in the sense of, we don't regard space as a military issue at all. They didn't have to start from scratch. They just say, all right, instead of you being called Space Command, we'll call you Space Force. And that's that. And so the surprising part of the story is that serious military people had to spend their days pretending they were creating this new thing, even though it was already in existence. But they had to do it in a certain way so that the president could feel proud of himself for having done this thing. I accomplished this. This is one of my things, one of my accomplishments. Even though it wasn't the thing and they didn't have anything to do and nothing different was going to happen, but they had to run around making it look like it. So, for instance, he'll say, now that's a branch of the military, so they're going to have uniforms, right? So let me see the new uniforms. Because you know how he is about fabric swatches, right? He wants to see the new uniforms. They didn't want to make it a joke, right? They weren't going to dress them as stormtroopers, although maybe that would have highlighted the absurdity of the issue for him. But who knows what he would understand from that. So they said, all right, we'll make it like the rest of the military. You'll have, what's the easiest one would be to say, let's take care of the utilities, the fatigues, because we already have those. And everybody knows you just get those, you just get the camouflage thing, and then you stick some patches on it, and boom, you have a uniform. It doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense. That, as lots of people pointed out, for instance, if they're Space Force guys, won't they want to have, if you're going to have camouflage, you're going to want camouflage that's going to camouflage you out in space, I guess. Shouldn't it be black with little, like stars and planets on it, like pajamas or something? And no, it shouldn't. But it doesn't make any sense. Like, for instance, does it make any particular sense that, Air Force people now wear camouflage fatigues? And if you're an Air Force pilot, one, you don't need to camouflage yourself, and two, you're not going to blend into anything in the sky wearing camouflage. The point is, it's just vaguely military, and they already have the stuff, and it doesn't make any sense to come up with anything new. So just what you do is you take that standard issue set of fatigues and you put the little name strip on it, and one says U.S. Army and the other says United States Marine Corps, and the other one says Coast Guard, and the other one says Air Force, and now this one will say Space Force on it. So fine, that's the way it works. And despite the fact that the camouflage won't hide you in space, neither will Navy fatigues hide you in the water, or Air Force fatigues hide you in the air. It's just, I guess, if you work close enough, maybe being in the Washington, D.C. area with lots of people who work at the Pentagon, you get used to the idea that, even if you're at work at the Pentagon, you're very often wearing those utilities and not a dress uniform, even though you won't blend into the bricks of the Pentagon by wearing, camouflage fatigues either. So it's not a surprise to people who see that in their daily lives, but I guess the rest of America got a good laugh out of it. So worth bringing up. Really just more because Space Force is a dumb idea. It's even dumber than the idea that you would camouflage yourself in space at all. In space, no one can hear you comment about how ineffective camouflage is. Anyway, let's see. The Republicans seem to have spent, the Senate Republicans, who are going to have to deal with the impeachment trial, seem to have spent the bulk of the weekend coming up with various ways of saying that there don't need to be any witnesses or that there shouldn't be any more evidence introduced into the case, and trying to come up with witty and snappy ways of doing that. I have Marsha Blackburn, for instance, her position on it being the Democrats, she says, were satisfied with their, and she puts it in scare quotes, investigation. Satisfied with their investigation when they voted to impeach Donald Trump. Now they need more evidence because they would like to introduce evidence at the trial. The Senate's job is not to hold an impeachment do-over, which of course they didn't, because the sole power of impeachment belongs to the House, and it would be ridiculous for the Senate to do an impeachment, and unconstitutional for the impeachment do-over to happen in the Senate. That, of course, is because you are holding a trial and not an impeachment do-over. And, of course, the reason that evidence and additional witnesses are in the offing is because the House managers think you, Marsha, need more evidence in order to decide the case in an informed and honest way. They're not, of course, the first to conclude that you guys probably haven't gotten it yet and might need a little extra help in figuring out what happened here. And so that's what evidence is for, and it's called a trial. And I don't know. So far they've had no serious success, I don't think. I think they've been banging their heads against walls, trying to get the rest of the country to see things their way. They have the MAGA base on their side, of course. But for the most part, average people, from my understanding of things, are basically viewing things as we thought they might. That evidence and witnesses are part of a trial, and everybody knows it, and why do you keep trying to pretend that it's not the case? So hopefully that continues to hold. We're still being teased by the usual suspects among the Republican Senate conference that they might, just might, be tempted to vote to actually allow some of that evidence and witness testimony to be brought in the Senate, and we'll see. Except that, well, you know, Susan Collins is one of them, and so I think really there's your answer. Though it really is difficult to imagine the Senate just saying, yeah, you know, to hell with it. We'll let the political chips fall where they may and just say, no thanks for the evidence. It looks like, though, the idea of dismissing the case entirely after opening arguments is dying. It's not clear that they're going to be able to hold together their 51 there. If McConnell pressed them to do it, they might just, you know, if they thought it would fly politically, that their best chances for their vulnerable members was to simply dismiss the thing, hold your breath, and see what happens, I think they could get their 51 votes to do it. I don't think there's anybody who holds their principles out above the political analysis of what will work for them in their re-election bids. And if the people they trust tell them just swallow hard and dismiss, then they'll do it. But I think the deal that's emerging appears to be, for instance, Josh Hawley and his big mouth painted himself into a corner by claiming that all Republicans really wanted to have that vote to dismiss, and to the extent that any of them were backing off was because they were chickens and they didn't really support the president. So he was going to force them to have such a vote. And I think what he's being asked to settle for, if the hints dropping from McConnell's office are any indication, and if they're accurate, they will likely adopt a rules package that allows for the Senate, if they want to consider a motion to dismiss at the end of the opening statements. And that's it. I guess Hawley's big win is McConnell will say we can have a vote on a rules package that allows for such a motion, but I do not want that motion made. I don't think our members want to take that vote. So it may be that they never even bother having a vote on a motion to dismiss, though the next vote would likely be a vote on the question of witnesses and additional evidence. that vote Republicans may carry in moving to adopt rules going forward that prohibit additional witnesses and evidence. And so, though it's not a dismissal of the case, it effectively brings the presentation to a close, and they would move more or less immediately to a vote on whether or not to convict the president based only on the opening arguments. And since it would be their intention not to convict the president, it would essentially be a dismissal of the case without having to call it a motion to dismiss the case. And Hawley gets to say, well, you see, they contemplated my dumb idea in the rules package. That means it's not a dumb idea, because if it was a dumb idea, it definitely wouldn't get involved. It wouldn't be included in the rules package. So therefore, what he's looking for at this stage is, if you won't give me the vote, at least give me something that I can show to people who think I'm dumb for having brought up this non-existent thing. A certificate that says this idea is 100% certified non-dumb, even though 0 people wanted to consider it, which really by itself means that it was dumb. But he will be able to carry that back home and say, see, people thought about my idea, so therefore I'm not the idiot that they said I was. All right, let's see. Another interesting item from over the weekend. This one not impeachment related, but I just thought this was perhaps of some interest to people. Andrew Yang, the latest candidate to decide to put his name on the line for term limits for Congress. That, of course, not a new idea, and I don't think he was pretending it was his idea or anything, but this was a weird tweet from him. I mean, they're all weird tweets from him. Why is he running for president? I don't know. Maybe he's got great ideas. I just haven't heard what they were. I'm for 12-year term limits for members of Congress, he says, and I know how to get it passed. That was the part that raised eyebrows for me. And the answer, he says, is exempt current lawmakers. See, they would pass it immediately, and we would have a more aligned and dynamic legislature in no time, which, of course, no time meaning about 2 years or so after they passed it immediately. Then, in no time, 2 years later, which is time, as it turns out, we would immediately have a much better legislature, although why, I really don't know, because it would be effective in 2 years. And then, of course, you'd have the 12-year term limits. Not explained in this tweet, by the way, is when the 12 years starts to run. Like if it exempt current lawmakers, like exempt it entirely, like if you're in now, then there's no term limit for you, but everyone who's elected starting in 2 years from now, say, would have a 12-year term limit. I'm not certain that we would have a more aligned and dynamic legislature all that quickly at all, as all the grandfathered members, you know how it is. If you seek re-election to Congress, it's a pretty good bet you're getting your seat back. 90% of the members who seek re-election in any given year do tend to win re-election. So let's say he meant, though, that even if you started with in 2 years from now, if you've already been there 12 years, you're out. One, I don't think that would immediately pass the Congress. Two, though, I guess more to the point, really, is the idea of exempting current lawmakers, making this proposition immediately acceptable to lawmakers. That's not new idea either. Term limits are not new, but he doesn't say he invented it. But he says, this is interesting. I know how to get it passed. That's called delaying your effective date. It's a very frequently used legislative trick. You write into the bill that the effective date of this law, if it's passed by both houses and signed into law, etc., will be January 3rd, 2020, 25, if you want to put it after the 2024 elections. Or if you pass this thing right now, you might make it the 2020 elections. And so January 2021, I don't know, whatever it is. But that's very frequently done, that they delay these things. And in fact, it is literally centuries old. We mentioned the other day the adoption of the 27th Amendment, which took, several hundred years to do, but that was about pay raises for Congress. And we read the phrasing that they used, that it wouldn't become, that pay raises adopted by Congress wouldn't become effective until another election for Congress had intervened. So they already have the standard language. An intervening election is a very commonly used trick. It's been around for hundreds of years. The idea of term limits also been around for hundreds of years. We've known about them, and we've had them built in for president, not for hundreds of years, but for decades now. And miraculously, though both concepts were known both to the founders and to everyone in between then and now, the Congress has never once immediately passed term limits, and we never did get a more aligned or dynamic legislature. I find that really interesting. I can't imagine thinking that you had come up with an original idea there and thinking I should also be president, because the first one is just a huge mistake. And although presidents make huge mistakes all the time, maybe there's another fantastic idea he's hiding somewhere, and he should be president. This one isn't it. And judging by the reaction that I got to acknowledging that he was into universal basic income, not a whole lot of people in my feed were convinced that was a good reason to be president either. So anyway, let's see. Also noting for the record, Brian Beutler's comment that it looks like things have fallen apart for Chuck Todd. That 3 weeks ago or so, right, at the end of 2019, as Brian says, Chuck Todd was adamant that he'd gotten wise to right-wing disinformation tactics and would no longer be susceptible to them. Today he welcomed, and that was yesterday, of course, Hugh Hewitt back on Meet the Press. Life comes at you over the course of about 3 weeks, I guess. And Hugh Hewitt, I guess, spent his time on Meet the Press insisting that he was going to vote in the Virginia primaries. He was going to vote in the Democratic primary and vote for Bernie Sanders. But he thought he was being clear that he was voting for Bernie Sanders, I guess he would say, ironically. He was trying to make sure that Bernie Sanders became the standard bearer for Democrats in the general election so that his choice would be clearer, and he would then, of course, vote, he said, for Donald Trump, and he thought many other people would too, because they wouldn't be able to stand the idea of Bernie Sanders' presidency because socialisms, or whatever the argument was, which I found interesting just in the sense that, if the shoe were on the other foot here, or you were talking about a legislator casting a vote in favor of a legislative proposal that they in fact opposed just to force a tough vote on their political opponents, it's not something you would ordinarily be able to get away with. A vote for a socialist is a vote for socialism. And that's it. And the idea that it's strategic voting and you should ignore it because it's Hugh Hewitt, when you're not going to be permitted by the Hugh Hewitts of the world to ignore it when it's say a Democrat trying to pull the same move, that vote would be hung around their neck for all times. Just another symptom of the imbalance in the approach of the political media to these things. For some reason, just granting Republicans passes on, just about anything. For instance, back to the impeachment topic for just a moment. For whatever reason, while Susan Collins waffles about whether or not she will, in fact, vote to allow witnesses to be brought or other evidence that's being developed in the Parnas document dumps, which we really ought to head back to as well. For the first couple of days afterwards, she, I guess, thought it would be wise to hint that she really would give in to this pressure and really would join with, say, the Mitt Romneys and the Lisa Murkowskis to insist that some of this additional evidence be brought forward. But then she seemed to tilt the other way again, and the excuse being this was what the other Republicans spent their time on the weekend, was saying, well, they say that this Lev Parnas character, who I don't know who he is, and nobody ever met him, et cetera, et cetera. The picture dumps have been hilarious. Why would we bring this evidence forward now? If the House really wanted it to be a part of the record, they should have included it. And of course, those of us who've been watching the whole thing develop understand and know offhand right away. Well, the reason it wasn't included in the House record is it hadn't been released until after the House was forced to go ahead with the impeachment. That may have had something to do with the decision to, quote unquote, delay the delivery of the impeachment articles to the Senate, or maybe not. But the fact is that information had to get cleared by a judge in order to be released, and it took the judge until just the other day to approve that release. And she just doesn't care when she comments to the press, well, if it's so important, why didn't the House bring it forward? In fact, I mean, you can tell she doesn't care, because if she wanted to know the answer to that question, if she wanted to, she could wait until the trial began and ask the managers, why didn't you bring this forward? Let the managers answer that question on the Senate floor and in front of everybody and on camera. And I guess that brings us back to the question of whether or not Mitch McConnell will, A, let it happen on camera, B, force it to happen at 3 a.m. so no one can hear the answer. But I'm just... I don't know. I don't understand really how that answer can play with the political press, that Collins is really and truly interested in getting to the bottom of things. Just she can't understand why this story that's as plain as day and was reported as a straight fact. The fact is that this is new evidence that's just emerging because the judge has just ruled that it can be released. Everybody saw it. Front page news across the country. Every damn newspaper there is. But Susan Collins, it somehow escaped her. Oh, I don't know why I would be paying attention to the impeachment trial just because that's my life for the next 2 weeks. But it seems to have worked. And everybody gets to walk around and say, golly, she's got a real conundrum on her hands. On the one hand, there's evidence. And on the other hand, I don't want to know about it. So what should I do? All right. Speaking of the Lev Parnas revelations over the weekend, what's the best summary of what we've learned over the last couple of days? I don't know. I've got like 35 of them parked in pocket. Everybody was giving their take on it. And let's see if we can't scroll through some of those and figure out what's the one we want to touch on. And there's also more speculation that I said I would save for later about what Lev Parnas, how he's playing his hand at this point, what made him flip, if that's what he's doing. I mean, we're constantly admonished to keep in mind that Lev Parnas isn't exactly what you would call a trustworthy guy. And I mean, that would be a huge part of weighing and evaluating his evidence in a real courtroom proceeding. And if you managed to engineer a presentation of his evidence during the Senate trial, it would be questioned and attacked both by the president's defense and the Republicans in the Senate. Well, he's such a liar and a schemer. How can you trust his evidence as truthful at this point? And, one argument is, as Greg pointed out, that's just the way it is. The president surrounds himself with shady characters who lie all the time. He seems to enjoy that, or he may even have a strategic reason for doing it, and this may be the strategic reason. But if they're the ones with direct evidence of how the president operated and what he asked them to do and how he asked them to do it, well, you're just going to have to take that into account. It doesn't mean you have to believe every word of everything they say, but you have to come to, ordinarily a juror would have to come to some sort of honest conclusion about it. Well, I think he's a liar in general, but he may be telling mostly the truth about this, and I'll weigh it at about, judge it. I think about 50% of it is true, 75% of it is true, 80% of it is true. Whereas, for some reason, I think 0% of the other guy's testimony is true. Then you would know what to do. You'd know how to find. Anyway, we'll see what the speculation is about what Parnas's game is after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and here on the ground, I'll bring this up. Matthew Rigdon commenting on the Space Force uniforms, and it's quite correct to say, to be fair, most of the Air Force spends its time on the ground, so Army camo makes sense for them. Of course, a lot of them spend it inside as well. So I'm not certain that, I don't know how much time the Air Force spends outside on the, although a lot of the basic like aircraft maintenance folks, of course, I guess that's possible, although they are often surrounded by tarmac. So I'm not certain that the jungle camo or even the desert camo makes a great deal of sense for them, but it makes sense in the sense that why spend time trying to invent additional camouflage that might work on tarmac, since it really won't work anyway. We have these uniforms, put the U.S. Air Force tape on it, and give it to them, and that's that. And but as he points out, all of Space Force will be staying on the ground as well, so something. It doesn't not make sense. The point is that, as ridiculous as it seems, or as fun as it is to make fun of the idea, and it is fun to make fun of everything that Space Force is doing from top to bottom, the fact that they happen to have the same uniforms as everybody else isn't that surprising. I guess what will really be interesting to see, and the real design issue is when you're designing dress uniforms that don't have any particular function to them at all, and so therefore could be anything. We'll see what they come up with for those guys. I mean, I assume they'll look a little bit like the dress uniforms for the other branches with different color schemes. And although if they made them all Darth Vader, that would be kind of funny. They could try that if they really wanted to go another direction. Or they could dress them all like the militias that are marching around in circles in the Richmond protest. Those guys have some interesting ideas about how they should be uniformed. All right. As we mentioned on our way out from the last break, there's some speculation out there, and it is speculation at this point, as to what Lev Parnas might be doing. Why is he changed over from being a willing participant, say, in the Trump schemes to essentially state's evidence in the Trump prosecution, even though he won't be given a chance to testify in all likelihood. And one of our listener friends, and I didn't ask whether he wanted to be identified or not, and if so, under what name he wanted to be identified. So for now, I'll withhold his name, although if you'd like to be credited, I'd be happy to tell everybody who's been keeping an eye on the speculations offered up. We've read some in the past, and we'll add some new ones today from Uncle Blazer, or the tweeter who uses the Twitter handle of Blake's Mustache. We maybe like 2 weeks ago, perhaps, read a couple of threads. I would characterize the Blake's Mustache / Uncle Blazer tweet threads as forward-thinking speculation, but not yet entirely grounded by reported fact from mainstream news sources. But it all seems to be derived from conclusions that he reaches by reading mainstream news sources and little else. It's rare that you couldn't find justification for any particular part of it in mainstream news sources along the way, which is why after I read through them, I think, okay, that makes a decent amount of sense. It's a decent theory, and that's all it is at the moment, but it seems pretty strong, and he can back it up along the way with news reports. So let's see what he's thinking about why Parnas is speaking up now. And part of it was hinted at by Greg's discussion of it. I mean, it's basically, I think we all kind of understand that Parnas is out for self-preservation at this point. He's mixed himself up with a bunch of liars and thieves and backstabbers who will lie for no good reason at all, just for the hell of it. And of course, if their self-preservation is on the line, that's relatively speaking a good reason to expect them to lie. And you can expect that they will do it. They're just not very good at it. And they have stock lies like, I never met the guy. And Parnas is an operator who has been protecting against that from the beginning. Some question as to whether that was just his MO and he liked taking pictures of himself with famous or semi-famous people, well-known people, so that it looked like he was important. And I'm sure that was definitely part of it. Operationally, that makes a lot of sense. You would show those pictures around, and before you flip, that would serve as your credentials when trying to cozy up to another operator on the same side. Here's some pictures of me with Corey Lewandowski, with Pete Sessions, with President Trump, with Mike Pence, with Rudy Giuliani, with Kellyanne Conway, and they would trust you. Who else would have that much access to close proximity with all of these people? So, I mean, that's the problem with it is, it actually kind of speaks to that person's credibility at the time. So if you're questioning, well, how would this person have all this information? How could they have overheard all these conversations? There's the photo evidence that they spent time in close proximity with all these people. Even if they were photo ops and set up photo ops, it doesn't really easily lend itself to, well, they were near them a lot, but not in an important way, not with the volume of photos that he has. On the other hand, there's also, like I was saying, I haven't been dissuaded from this yet, that Parnas knew from the beginning that he was likely to have his work disavowed and people would flip on him and try to pin much more of this scheme that he was involved in on him, and that these pictures might, if not by themselves be a way out, they would be a way of undermining the case against him if the case against him was being made by the people he was previously cooperating with. But there's more to it. Uncle Blazer's theory, here is his thread on silencing Parnas, a timeline. It begins back in September, late September of last year, September 30th, 2019. Parnas receives a letter from the House Intelligence Committee asking him for documents by October 7th and to appear for a deposition on October 10th. So late September, this is the point at which the whistleblower's report has broken into the public consciousness. Between September 30th and October 2nd or so was when we all learned who Parnas was. And we learned his name, and we learned that he was mixed up in a lot of this through Rudy Giuliani. Well, the House Intelligence Committee understood that and asked him for documents and to appear for a deposition. Also on September 30th, Parnas, I guess having received this communication from the House Intelligence Committee, calls Giuliani asking what to do about it. Giuliani agrees to get John Dowd, remember him, the lawyer who for a while worked for Trump on his defense team in the Mueller probe, and at some point left his employ. But John Dowd was the one who very weirdly took the blame. I can't remember exactly what it was. We'll have to go back and look at the reports. But something that Trump tweeted, and it was wrong and controversial and problematic by itself for some reason. And Dowd claimed, I actually wrote that one for the president, so I take the blame on that. I can't even remember what it was, and it's probably bad that I can't, and probably be very revealing if we knew what it was. And maybe one of our remote production assistants out there via Twitter using the KITM hashtag would like to send us their recollection / proof of what those things what that tweet was about and how that resolved itself. But let me continue on for the moment with this thread, just as a reminder about who John Dowd was. So Dowd gets sent by Giuliani. Go to Parnas, and I want you to catch up with him and see what's going on and talk to him about what to do about the House's request. And by way of sourcing on this, Uncle Blazer here says you can find that from part 2 of the Maddow-Parnas interview from last week. He reports, Giuliani told me John Dowd was going to come and see me. So by October 2nd of last year, Trump had signed papers waiving any conflicts, allowing Dowd to represent Parnas. Even though I don't think Dowd is still on his defense team. Maybe he is. But even if he wasn't, you'd probably want to get that waiver and from your prior client if you had any serious interest in representing Parnas. So that waiver, I guess, or at least news of the waiver, reached Parnas, and we learned that in his recent document dump, that there was this waiver. I don't know whether that means that a copy of the waiver appears in the document dump, or discussion of there being a waiver appears maybe in his text messages, or what. But by October 3rd, Dowd has now sent a letter to the House Intelligence Committee on Parnas's behalf, I guess, saying that some of the documents requested from Parnas are privileged and that the subpoena is overly broad, and so they may or may not be complying with any of it or with some part of it. And we get a pause here, as Uncle Blazer says, all right, we'll take a pause, and he says, it's clear from Dowd's October 3rd letter that Parnas will have to comply with the House, especially once a subpoena hits. The best Dowd is hoping for is to stall and place limits on what Parnas will produce. Parnas needs to comply, Parnas's need to comply is the motive, though, for making him disappear. Now, they didn't do a good job in making him disappear, but he did briefly go out of circulation. Parnas was also a problem because he told the Trump team that he had no problem with giving documents and testimony to the House. That, too, apparently sourced to the Maddow-Parnas interview, part 2. And, of course, we see now that he certainly would be claiming, I have no problem giving this stuff to the House. He's giving it out left and right. Now, October 8th, Parnas and Fruman, you all remember this story, and this is where the retelling of the story becomes slightly different or is viewed in a different light. And I can see it now. The different light is plausible. But you remember this part of the story? October 8th, Parnas and Fruman booked one-way tickets to Vienna, departing the next day, October 9th. We, of course, remember that. he's got his sources on this one too. He just happens to be referencing BuzzFeed and Daily Beast articles about that. But we all remember the one-way tickets to Vienna. Very suspicious, right? And then we learned, well, why Vienna? And then we learned their excuse for why a one-way ticket. And then we saw the Justice Department arrest them. And that made sense because these guys were involved in this shady dealing and maybe something that was going to lead to impeachment, et cetera, et cetera. And to buy one-way tickets to Vienna the next day didn't make any sense. But it might have struck you at that point, right then and there, as I guess it did with Uncle Blazer. Well, I mean, that does seem awfully stupid, doesn't it? And maybe there should be I'd like more explanation of that. Well, here is some anyway. So, DOJ, he says, would have us believe that these one-way tickets suggest Parnas and Fruman were fleeing the country. Yeah, it does suggest that they're fleeing the country. But, he says, that doesn't add up for a lot of reasons. Why not? I thought they were fleeing the country. Well, first, Giuliani said the reason for the trip was to prep Victor Shokin for a interview on Fox News with Hannity in Vienna the next day. Or 2 days away from when they bought the ticket. In other words, October 10th. Hannity was going to interview the ex-prosecutor Victor Shokin, the one that Biden delivered the message had to go. So, he goes on to say, it's not clear whether this interview was real or whether it was a trick to make it appear that Parnas was on the run. That's really interesting. Now, the interview never came together, right? And there was no indication from any sources that I ever saw that Hannity, too, was on his way to Vienna. But I guess if he's going by private jet, we wouldn't necessarily have known. And I guess I will say this. I wondered, for instance, in the initial dump of photos of who is Lev Parnas and who is he connected to, we saw him flying on private jets all over the place with Giuliani. And it did strike me at the time, but I didn't really stop and take note of it. Because he doesn't own a private jet. He's depending on other people's private jets. And I guess once his name appears in the paper, people won't want to give him the jet anymore. But I did stop and think for just a second. Well, if he has to get to Vienna, and he's had access with Giuliani's not disclaiming him at this point. When he travels with Giuliani, they travel by private jet. Why does he need to fly commercial to Vienna? Man, all right. Well, if it says here that Giuliani was planning on joining them in Vienna the next day, so maybe the jet that he has access to, he's going to hold on to. But Giuliani doesn't own a jet either. He's operating by borrowing other people's jets. So surely he knows the second high roller who could have given a jet to Fruman and Parnas to get them to Vienna, especially since apparently they were so cash-strapped that they opted for the one-way ticket rather than the round-trip ticket because it was just less cash out of pocket. And also, as it's explained later, they weren't entirely sure when they were coming home, so maybe a one-way ticket makes some sense. But, yeah, what happened to the private jets? That did strike me. And Hannity, too, might be going, but there was no indication that he was, even though with a private jet he could just kind of go to Vienna for the day without necessarily drawing any attention to himself. But that is an interesting theory, the idea that you guys need to go to Vienna, you need to go right away, you need to go commercial, and you need to pay for it. You need to front the money. Pretty much guarantees that they're going to do exactly what they shouldn't. Walk in to the airport and buy one-way tickets to Vienna the day or so after it looked like they might get arrested at any moment. So, how does that happen? If the Hannity interview was really happening, Uncle Blazer continues, did Parnas need to be there? Well, we always wondered why he needed to be in Vienna, but it was always our speculation. Well, he doesn't really do any translating and he doesn't really do any operating there. He's just carrying messages back and forth, say, from Firtash, or Firtash, as he pronounces the last name. So, did he need to be there? Maybe not for the interview, but maybe to pick up something from Dmitro Firtash. And the story is, Rudy was supposed to come too, but not leave until the 10th, even though the interview was on the 10th. So he might be arriving just in time for the damn thing. I don't know. Sounds to me, Uncle Blazer says, like Rudy just didn't want to be there when Lev got popped, as he says, by the Southern District of New York folks. Huh. That could be. I mean, usually they'd travel together. You go on ahead. I'll be there the next day. But isn't the interview tomorrow? Yeah, but, I'll get there. In any event, he continues, records show Fruman and Parnas booked one-way tickets because they cost $8,000 compared to a round trip of $20,000. They were also not sure when they'd return, which Giuliani probably orchestrated to get them set up to buy one-way tickets. That's a thought. Also, get this. At the time of his arrest, this is a quote from the article he attaches here from UK's Independent. At the time of his arrest, Mr. Parnas was carrying 6 phones, tablets, and computers, I guess. Unless it was 6 phones, but also some tablets and computers. 8 more devices were taken from his home. And he says, you don't flee the country with devices filled with incriminating evidence on you and in your house. I'm not as certain about that conclusion. You flee the country with whatever you got on you when you need to flee the country. He had a few hours to prepare. But I'm not entirely convinced that he wasn't fleeing the country because he had a whole bunch of electronic devices with him. If I'm fleeing the country, I'd probably take my electronic devices, but I might not leave any more at home. That's a possibility. Anyway, on October 9th, he continues, Parnas and Fruman meet with Giuliani for lunch at the Trump Hotel in D.C. before heading to the airport for their flight to Vienna. Meanwhile, guess who just happens to be in New York that day for a meeting with the Southern District of New York? It's, as he calls him, Old Bullfrog Bill Barr. What a coincidence. And I remember that being reported, but I'm not certain what that has to do with anything by itself, although I was a little bit unclear as to why Fruman and Parnas, who split their time between New York and Florida, were flying out of D.C. to Vienna when they could have flown out of JFK or something like that. But Giuliani, for whatever reason, finds himself at the Trump Hotel, so they stop by for lunch. But again, this seems like you guys should be getting to your flight, don't you think? I suspect, Uncle Blazer says, that Giuliani met Lev and Igor for lunch for appearances' sake. Make Lev and Igor feel all warm and fuzzy about their trip to Vienna to help out their buddy Giuliani. Giuliani likely assured them he'd meet them there the next day. And then he says, psych, bitches. I guess so. Now, next tweet, Barr visited with prosecutors in the Manhattan office on Thursday, the day of Lev and Igor's arrest. Part of what his aides said was a routine check-in visit. This according to the LA Times that he attaches here. A routine check-in visit? Really, bro? That's some effing coincidence, no? Well, maybe, maybe not. But it does seem, it's oddly timed, certainly. But for the Attorney General to check in with the Sovereign District of New York isn't totally out of the question. But there's more speculation here. We are supposed to believe that SDNY got wind of Lev and Igor fleeing the country on October 9th and swooped in to arrest them before they got away. And Barr was told about this on the day of. That does seem a little bit more suspicious. He says, I call BS. Lev and Igor routinely went to Ukraine and Vienna on one-way tickets. That's not information I had seen before, but apparently they were saying, we did this all the time for cash savings. And it sounded like an excuse at the time. Probably would have been a good time to say, yeah, we've done it before. Every time we've flown to Ukraine and Vienna on a one-way ticket, we've come back. And I guess that must have been something that they said to the judge, because we were all a little bit surprised that after the fact that they didn't deny Parnas and Fruman bail. I was thinking, that guy isn't somebody you're going to want to let out when we all thought they were trying to flee the country. But if they did tell the judge, we do this all the time. Here's 5 other times we've flown out on one-way tickets and come right back. You know where Lev was on September 30th, Uncle Blazer asks, when he first got the letter from the House Intelligence? He was in Vienna. I did not know that, but he sources that to, again, part 2 of the Maddow interview. If you saw it, then you might have some recollection of whether he actually said that or not. Lev was in Vienna all the time. Why all of a sudden did he get popped on this trip to Vienna after the impeachment inquiry came knocking? Turning back to October 9th, Uncle Blazer says, we find Lev and Igor walking down the jetway to board their flight from D.C. to Vienna, and surprise, out pops Bill Barr's FBI to nab them and take them to jail. Later, on October 9th, Bill Barr headed from his routine meeting with the Southern District of New York to a meeting at Rupert Murdoch's house. That did strike everybody as rather non-routine. I remember that. What did they discuss? Maybe the Hannity interview or just general conspiracy? Who knows? It was an interesting thing for him to do. And again, that the Attorney General walks into the Southern District of New York just for a routine meeting and they say, oh, we just found out Lev Parnas is leaving for Vienna on a one-way ticket. And like we've been puzzling over why he flipped. Remember, at this point, everybody thinks Lev Parnas is on Team Trump. And so is Bill Barr. Why does Bill Barr say, ooh, you better go arrest him, as opposed to, let him go? Turning back to Lev, as a matter of fact, he says, isn't it convenient that he was represented by Dowd, who then visits him in the pokey to tell him to keep his mouth shut and protect Trump? That, according to the Maddow interview as well. They took it too far, though. Parnas is no dummy. He figured out he was being silenced. And Lev told Maddow he was scared of Barr, and for good reason. Lev thought Barr was on the team, but Barr allowed his goons to pop him, allowed the FBI to arrest him. Lev isn't that dumb. He knows Barr could have prevented it and probably suspected Barr had orchestrated it. I mean, if Barr were as corrupt as we all think he was, why didn't he let Lev flee the country so that he would be beyond the reach of a subpoena? That is a good question. Parnas told Dowd to get out of his face, to the point where Dowd apparently had to hit the emergency button when he visited him in prison and have the guards come rescue him from this mobbed up lunatic who was about to, as he says, straight beat his ass. I don't know about that, but okay. SDNY fought hard to keep Lev from getting out on bail, though. And what was their main argument for that? Of course, they argued that he was a flight risk because he had been caught fleeing the country, supposedly, when they arrested him. Good idea to catch him fleeing the country, quote unquote, so that you can deny him bail and then therefore keep him in jail and quiet. The judge didn't buy it, though. He let Lev out on bail and Lev sang like a bird. The judge also authorized Parnas's document dump to the House. And this may just have saved Lev's life because Barr has a way of silencing inmates for good. Like, Jeffrey Epstein, I think, is supposed to be the implication there. And, I got to tell you, that's not a bad theory of things. Thinking back on it, can't really explain either why he wasn't held without bail if he was really fleeing the country, but I also can't explain why Barr would authorize his arrest if he really thought that he had the goods on Trump, except that if you held him in jail, you might have a better chance of holding him incommunicado and keep him from realizing what's going on and flipping and spilling the beans like he's doing now. It's pretty interesting. There's another thread from Uncle Blizzard that perhaps we'll share tomorrow or during the rest of the week about the SDNY aspect of the case and who's handling things there, and a little speculation on, for instance, why the current U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman, who is a Trump supporter and Trump donor, max donor to the 2016 campaign and who served on the transition team, is handling this case, given, of course, that Berman did recuse himself from the Michael Cohen case when that case landed on the SDNY's doorstep. Why not also recuse yourself from the Parnas case? The logic seems to be the same. but for some reason he didn't do it, and I guess the speculation is because the Cohen case landed at SDNY under Jeff Sessions, who wasn't particularly cooperative when it came to recusing oneself and kept himself out of the harm's way by doing so. But by the time the Parnas case landed at SDNY, it was Bill Barr in charge, and he let him know, no, in no uncertain terms, it's a no from the DOJ. Main Justice says, Berman, no, you can't recuse yourself. You don't want to handle the case? Quit. And instead, play for us and play it our way. And maybe that's exactly what they got. Okay, time to hand the microphones over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. That gives us tomorrow, I guess, to parse through the filings and briefs before the actual trial begins tomorrow, and we'll see if we can figure out what the Trump team has to say for it.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, let's see what they've got up for today's menu. Let's see. Civil rights groups battle Trump in court to block a legally dubious census datagram. That back in court, too. Displaced Puerto Ricans moved to new in Florida are poised to swing the state to Democrats in 2020. We all hope for that. That and much, much more with Justice Putnam on his Monday program next.